to passing $1.9 trillion bill, or is that final number still up for negotiation?
I'm committed to pass. Look, here's some of you are probably economists or college professors or you teach it in school. This is the first time in my career, and as you can tell, I'm over 30, the first time in my career that there is a consensus among economists, left, right, and center, that is and including the IMF and in Europe, that the overwhelming consensus is in order to grow the economy a year, 2, 3, and 4 down the line, we can't spend too much. Now's the time we should be spending. Now's the time to go big. You may recall I managed the last experiment we had with the stimulus, and it was no, I don't mean it that way, but it was $800 billion. We thought we needed more than that, and we think we did. It ended up working, but it slowed things up by about, and depending who you talk to, between 6 months and a year and a half.
I like hearing that. I like that answer. In part, Biden makes the point of saying, look, the last time around, the stimulus was too small. And because it was too small, we didn't get the bang for the buck that we needed out of that particular stimulus. And so the economy limped along from one of the largest hits since the Great Depression. Well, in this very specific case, Biden is saying, I am willing to go big because the first time in my life, I am being told by all of my technocrats that this is the time to go big. And we can't go big enough. Meaning the problem is going too small. The problem is not going too big. I agree with that. 1,000% agree with that assessment. Right on, Joe Biden. Right on. And yet, within the same town hall, that same Joe Biden says this, basically repudiating what he said prior.
Loans are crushing my family, friends, and fellow Americans.
Me too.
The American dream is to succeed, but how can we fulfill that dream when debt is many people's only option for a degree? We need student loan forgiveness beyond the potential $10,000 your administration has proposed. We need at least a $50,000 minimum. What will you do to make that happen?
I will not make that happen. It depends on whether or not you go to a private university or public university. It depends on the idea that I say to a community, I'm going to forgive the debt, the billions of dollars of debt for people who have gone to Harvard and Yale and Penn and schools, my children. I went to a great school, I went to a state school. But is that going to be forgiven rather than use that money to provide for early education for young children who come from disadvantaged circumstances? But here's what I think. I think everyone, and I've been proposing this for 4 years, everyone should be able to go to community college for free. That costs $9 billion, and we should pay for it. And the tax policies we have now, we should be able to pay for it. You spend almost that money as a break for people who own racehorses. And I think any family making under $125,000 whose kids go to a state university they get into, that should be free as well.
Loans are
So Biden is basically means testing. Means testing always create problems. So what about the person who makes $126,000? Is that person grandfathered in? And why is that $1,000 the differential between whether or not the person can go to school for free or whether this person cannot? I hope you get the point that I'm making here. Just because you have $125,000, it depends on the state that you're in. If you're living in California or if you're living in New York, let's say Manhattan or somewhere like that, that number may not necessarily be that high. Hell, if you're living in Washington, D.C., I'm telling you, just from rent alone, $125,000 is not a huge amount. It depends on the state you're in, right? And so the idea that 125 and then the person who's making 130 is like, whoa, that's not fair. Why can't my kid go to school for free? No, the reality of it is, it's not means testing. You get rid of the debt in its entirety, and you allow people to go to school. If you want to say state schools and community colleges, fair enough. The means testing is going to create a problem. in and of itself. And unfortunately, oftentimes it's like if you make 125,000 or above, you have to have a bad knee. If the person has a bad back, that means there needs to be a limp, and then you can get it. Like, you don't need the means test. I don't care, and nobody's going to care if you pay for Harvard, Yale, and Penn, especially if they're being covered also. Meaning, if you're basically saying, look, we're going to wipe out the student debt. The majority of that debt, the large share of that debt, is not necessarily held by the people going to Yale, Penn, and Harvard. Those are elite universities. And by definition, if they are indeed elite universities, they're going to be in the top 1 or 2%. Meaning that's not a valid excuse not to cover the rest of the people. Also, Joe Biden went into this like he was king of blacks. Joe Biden, king of the blacks, king of the blacks. That's what Clyburn said anyway. And in doing so, if you indeed are king of blacks and you're indeed getting that black support, you need to do more than just pick Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is nothing in regards to giving back to the black community. Paying for school is. Paying for health care is. Meaning, if you're going to go through this process of saying, yes, we're going to have Medicare for all, that will dramatically help the people at the bottom of the income scale, even though they may be more whites on welfare. Yes, African Americans can be in deeper levels of poverty. And the people who you would help the most in a plan like Medicare for all, or for that matter, the elimination of student debt, are indeed the people at the bottom. I don't care if those people are white. I don't care if those people are Hispanic. I don't care. I want all of them dealt with because the issue is an issue of class, not an issue of identity. And the 1 or 2% of people who are part of the top 1% don't matter in the grand scheme of things in regards to paying off the student debt. I don't care if you pay it off. I don't care if there's 1 or 2 people from Harvard or Yale or Penn or whatever those elite universities are part of it. And no, if you're going to means test it, it's going to fuck it up. Look, if you want to make the delineation state colleges going forward, fair enough. If you want to say private colleges are not necessarily a part of it going forward, okay, fair enough. You can do that. I guess I'm just making the very basic point that if you're going to means test, you're going to create friction and conflict among people who are in the subjective area of the means. If it's at 125, the people who are within 5 or 10,000 are probably going to be pretty pissed because it's not a dramatic departure from what the other people were making to get them and their kids in a state school. That's all I'm saying. The means testing makes it that much more difficult to run the program as opposed to saying state schools are free, period. If you need to build more, build more. You spend $1 trillion on the military, take some of that money to build school. From the standpoint of this debt now, what? It's up to 1.3 trillion or something like that. Yes, you have the power to eliminate it. You should do so. Joe Biden, initially, I'm going to go big. I'm going to go big. However, I could only do 10,000 in student loans. Here's the reality of it. Joe Biden, with the stroke of a pen, could eliminate a student loan debt. Donald Trump has used that faculty, and so has Obama. Both have basically proof of concept. Joe Biden only needs to do it. In this very specific case, Joe Biden is not going to do it. Joe Biden does not want to do it. And he is using this nonsense of 1 or 2% of the people that go to some of the top elite universities as an excuse to not eliminate student debt for the rest of the public, the overwhelming majority of which are poor or middle class. Joe Biden has the entire and complete authority to eliminate student debt. He is full of shit here. He knows it. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you allowing me to do so. As you can see, I am back on my typical platform, my typical channel. I am on Rothkin now, and I have a lot of videos on Rothkin, and I'm going to be putting videos there. They're going to be different than the ones I put on YouTube. Because I want to get people to give a little bit more support to Rockfin in general. YouTube cannot be trusted. And whether they need to be broken up, I would make the argument they need to be turned into a utility and regulated as such, with an idea of the First Amendment built into the platforms themselves. But either way, in the meantime, there needs to be somewhat of a diversification of these channels. YouTube has somewhat of an advantage because of their paying model. And other companies that are trying to get into it have a huge and a steep climb to do so because of so many people that are basically congregated around YouTube. The hope, though, is that they piss enough people off and enough people are concerned where those people start on some level to migrate to other platforms and give those other platforms a little bit of light. In this case, I'm doing Rothkin. I still will be doing a channel here. I don't trust YouTube at all. So definitely, if you enjoy the content, please consider becoming a patron, or for that matter, donating to PayPal, or I suppose Rothkin Sips. But either way, I'm back. Hopefully, I will stay back. But let's get to this. Let's do the news. Joe Biden, we're going to go big, but not too big. We can't go big enough, but I can only give $10,000 in student debt. There's a disharmony here in this language. If you're going to go big, go big. Fact of the matter is, I can make a complete argument that the government of the United States, it doesn't matter that it was run by Trump, it is the government of the United States. He was doing it with the power and authority of the government of the United States. It got nearly 500,000 people killed. 500,000 people killed. That was a direct relation of Trump and what he was doing in that office. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is if the government is responsible for that, maybe the government could do something to try to alleviate the burdens and the difficulties that the public has if you're going to look for a justification at all. Personally, I don't even think a justification is needed, but if you need one, right there. 500,000 people dead as a result of malfeasance by the United States government. That, in and of itself, should be enough of a justification to push through Medicare for all, as an apology, as an I'm sorry, and yeah, as just good goddamn policy and good goddamn governance. From the standpoint of paying off the student debt, you can make a similar argument. Kids go to school. It is not just for them. It is for also the larger society. I hope you understand what I'm saying here. That kid that is getting that particular education is not just for its own benefit. And by the way, even if it was for its own benefit, what do I care? From the standpoint of a society, it benefits me to have people who are knowledgeable, who can go to school, who can make those businesses, who can make new products, who can come up with a different research. It benefits us as a larger society for those kids to go to school. It is counterproductive to put $50,000 of debt on their backs to do so. Some greedy, smug asshole from somewhere decided that they were going to make money off the backs of children. People who are 17 years old, where they basically says, you want to have a decent life? Pay me, sign it. Otherwise, you're going to be poor and hungry for the rest of your life. Counselors, teachers, they tell those kids, go to school, go to school, go to school. And yet, how are they going to pay for it? Doesn't necessarily come up. No, those kids go to school and from personal experience end up with thousands, tens of thousands of dollars on their backs by the time they're 18, 19, 20, and 21. They're being taken advantage of entirely and completely. As a society itself, that should not be tolerated. More importantly, as a society, again, we should care. We should love the fact that kids go to school. We should love the fact, we should celebrate the fact that all of these kids are going to get an education, that they're going into all the different topics and areas of expertise, science, mathematics, literature, art, etc. It's a beneficial thing to our culture, and it's something that we should foster. And we are counter fostering it by basically hobbling kids as they go about their education, despite the fact that it should be beneficial to all of us. I have no issue with them eliminating all student debt. Zero. I don't care if you eliminate a Harvard kid or a Yale kid. And there's a question to be had with, do those kids even have debt in the way that Joe Biden is talking about? Meaning, if your kid is going to Harvard or Yale, let's say for the moment, you're not rich, you just did a great job academically, you still are stuck with debts. You're still stuck with the large bills. I'm making the point that the rich parents may have actually already paid off their kids' school. They don't have that issue. That issue is singular and unique to the poor and to the middle class of this country, maybe even the upper middle class of this country. So Joe Biden talking about $10,000, it's nonsense. You have the capability, you have the authority, you have the power to eliminate that student debt with the stroke of a pen. And furthermore, you can ensure that the IRS don't come from the people after you do so. You might not know this, but if you live, let's say 20 years or so without paying your student loans, let's say you're able to skip past it, the IRS will come after you looking at that money as basically something that you were somehow given. I know it sounds weird, but it's basically like, all right, they didn't pay this off, or there's some kind of forgiveness associated with this. But the IRS looks at that as money that you were given and come after you for it. Biden, if he did that, would also have to ensure that the IRS didn't turn around and come after the people after the student loan time comes due. They screw people over in so many ways. And it's like a kid with the temerity to get an education, so we're going to punish them for getting an education. Think about what we're saying here. What kind of society do you want? And is that society bettered, emboldened by kids who are going to school or not? And if it is emboldened by kids who are going to school, should we not incentivize that? Should we not foster that? Should we not celebrate that? One way of not celebrating it is charging and putting $50,000 of debt on their back by the time they're 18, 19, 21 years old. It is a shame that we're doing this to kids. A shame that we're doing this. And then to even have to make the argument that it is to the detriment of our society. Those kids aren't getting married. Those kids, the jobs that they take may be different than the jobs they would take otherwise if they didn't have $50,000 on their back and they had to pay for it. I'm making the point that it is a detriment to our society to have that much debt floating around on the backs of these kids, and it is a detriment to these kids living. And by definition, the society living, because it does impact all of us. Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren have been pushing exceedingly hard on this point, and they have been actually lobbying Joe Biden, putting heat on Joe Biden to get Joe Biden to go $50,000, get rid of $50,000 of student debt. And by the way, the $50K on some level is a means testing in and of itself, because there's some people who are going to have more debt than that. Doctors, lawyers, etc., which is probably why they ended up with the number of $50K to try to make it more passable. I'm just saying, Joe Biden has the authority to do it. If he does not use that authority, that's on Joe Biden. But the authority is there to do so. Listen to Schumer go after Biden on this.
Student debt is just a huge burden on the shoulders of millions of New York students and tens of millions of Americans. Ahead of this new administration, the four of us are calling on President of the United States to take executive action to administratively cancel up to $50,000 in student loan debt for federal student loan borrowers. And he can also make it such that when they do this, they have no tax liability. So when they get this so-called forgiveness from the federal government, they don't have to. We have come to the conclusion that the President Biden can undo this debt, can forgive $50,000 of debt the first day he becomes president. You don't need Congress. All you need is the flick of a pen.
You don't need Congress. All you need is that flick of a pen. Now, what is Chuck Schumer talking about? So this is, let's see, WarrenSenate.gov. This is Warren. Even before the corona, look right here. Congress has granted Secretary of Education the legal authority to broadly cancel student debt under Section 432 of the Higher Education Act of 1965, 20 U.S.C. 1082A, which grants the Secretary the authority to modify, compromise, waive, or release any right, title, claim, lien, or demand, however acquired, including any equity or any right of redemption. The Department of Education has reportedly used this authority to implement modest relief for federal student loan borrowers during the COVID-19 pandemic. meaning you're in for a penny, in for a pound. The act and the power of it, in and of itself, if you were allowed to basically change that for students now or during COVID, that same power, that same authority allows you to not just nudge it, but to eliminate it totally. They can get rid of student loan debt. Joe Biden can do it with the flick of a pen. Chuck Schumer is right. Let's keep going. So right here, this resolution recognizes the Secretary of Education's broad administrative authority to cancel federal student loan debt under the existing authorities of Section 432A of the Higher Education Act of 1965. I'm going to put this in the bottom so you guys can have it for yourself. This calls on the President of the United States to take executive action to administratively cancel up to $50,000 in federal student loan debt. Now, if you notice, Chuck Schumer said that before Biden got elected. Warren has been tweeting this out since Biden has been on that stage saying $10,000. This is their way of pressuring Biden. And I'm pretty sure behind the scenes they're doing the exact same thing. This resolution calls on the President of the United States to take executive action and administrate, right, said that part, the federal student loan borrowers' existing legal authorities under Section 432A and any other authorities available under the law. This encourages the President of the United States in taking such executive action to use the executive authority under the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to ensure no tax liability for federal student loan borrowers resulting from the administrative debt cancellation. That's what Schumer said, yes, over there also. That basically, if they got rid of that, if the president said, all right, you're done, you don't have those loans anymore, the IRS could look at that as income. That basically, you've been paid income in order to give to the schools, despite the fact that no money at all has changed hands, and not just not changed hands, you didn't pay them at all. They look at that as a gift to you, which is a tax liability. And they would come after you for that. So they're basically saying, look, the president also, in addition to having authority to get rid of student loan debt, have the authority to prevent the IRS from doing just that. And the president, in doing one, needs to ensure that he does the other. This encourages the President of the United States in taking such executive action to ensure the administrative debt cancellation helps close racial wealth gaps and avoid the bulk federal student debt cancellation benefits accruing to the wealthiest of borrowers and borrowers for the entire duration of the COVID-19 pandemic. The reason that they keep going into this is because a lot of students of color go to college as a way of getting out of issues of poverty or bad neighborhoods or bad situations. Many of those kids aren't able to pay that money back because they didn't necessarily finish school, leaving them as the worst of both worlds. A, you didn't finish school, and yet you have a debt on your back. You weren't able to basically use what you got, and you still got the debt associated with it. And so they're basically making the point that says, look, this will close the racial wealth gap to X number of percentage points. And this is a significant way of doing so. Now, look, Joe Biden should do this. There is no hedge. There's nothing against Joe Biden doing this. He's not going to lose out on this. The American public basically agrees with the premise of the president doing so. And I got to be honest, it would allow Democrats to dominate the conversation going forward. Not only would they win the midterms, I mean, it would be hard to pull Democrats out under that guise. I mean, think about what these guys are talking about for a moment. They're talking about $15 minimum wage increase. On top of that, they're talking about $300 going to kids, just in the country in general, parents that have kids, $300 going to them almost as a stipend. And if they're talking about this, if Joe Biden went through with this, he will be canceling $50,000 of debt for people who are in already difficult and dire situations, especially with everything that took place from the COVID crisis. Yeah, it's not much. It's modest. But keep in mind, it's modest juxtaposed against nothing. Or for that matter, juxtaposed against just being fleeced. I'm making the point that with the $1.9 trillion plan, if Democrats went through with that, if they gave to $2,000, which apparently they're not going to do, if they went through with the health care thing. Joe Biden saying sounds like a public option to me, but again, we got to get into the details. But if he indeed passes that public option, if he indeed passes $50,000 of student loan debt, that, I got to be honest, is far more than I ever intended for a Biden presidency, because my point of view was so low in regards to what was going to take place. But I suspect that the American public point of view is also very low. And because that point of view is very low, these provisions will probably ensconce Democrats in that White House and going through the midterms. Look, the public needs those things, right? And if the public is going to get those things through a political party, it will come across as if the political party is doing it for public will. That, in and of itself, is enough of a reason for me to do it, because it would keep me in office and it would keep me popular while in office. But Joe Biden doesn't seem to have those proclivities, and he seems to be motivated by something else entirely. What that something else is, who knows? I suspect it's people putting dollars in his pockets. And yeah, an ideology that he's basically exhibited through the 47 years that he's been in politics. Yeah, there's no reason not to do this. None. Zilch. Zero. He should do it. And the excuses that he's given, oh, there's a kid going to Yale and Harvard. So what? So what? What is the percentage of kids going to Yale, Harvard, and Penn? What percentage of those kids have student debt? Because I would imagine some of those kids are going to have parents that are going to be able to pay for it. The kids that are going to Penn, Harvard, and Yale, the ones that aren't rich, that I guess you're trying to say that are in this kind of elite category, they still have student loans. You can have a parent that worked as a janitor, that had a kid that had phenomenal academic achievement, and that kid may get a scholarship. But let's say the scholarship doesn't pay everything. I'm making the point that it is not that straightforward for Joe Biden to be like, oh, I shouldn't have to, a parent shouldn't have to pay for other kids. Nonsense. Just pay it all. It's like they're trying to rip this stuff apart of okay, this guy's okay, but that guy's not okay because that guy got $500 more than is allowed under the plan. So fuck that guy. Just pay it off. Just pay it off. You have the capability to do it. Do it. And $50,000, by the way, again, it's not all student loan debt. It's one thing if they say we're eliminating all student loan debt, 1 trillion. They're trying to get him just to get 50,000. Some people have 60,000, 70,000, 80,000. It depends on how long those people were in school. You will get the preponderance of people with the 50K. But let's be clear. This is not the elimination of all student loan debt. 50K is it's the least you can do. This is why I keep saying that 1.9 trillion should be a floor, not a ceiling. And the entire time, the way it's been discussed as a ceiling. It should be a floor. 50K, flick of the pen. Should have been done on day one. I'm going to leave this here. I'm going to leave. So this is Politico. Biden advisors have repeatedly said they prefer to see congressional approval to forgive $10,000 per borrower as a campaign promise. But Schumer is ramping up efforts to convince the White House to move quickly and cancel $50,000 of student loan debt per borrower with a flick of a pen through executive action. The pressure from the Senate leader from Biden's own party appeared to draw a response from the White House on Thursday. A spokesperson said for the first time that the administration officials were entertaining the possibility of executive action on the issue, but also reiterated their goal of passing legislation. So Schumer apparently is making inroads, but who the hell knows what those inroads are or whether or not this is just political language. This is one of the things that the president could do on his own, Schumer said on Thursday at a press conference with Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, progressive Democrat. Also, Democrats in the House have been pushed from this also, meaning you have the House and the Senate. The interesting thing is why. Now, I've read stuff that makes the point that Schumer is going to be up for election coming up soon. On top of that, I would imagine that Schumer wants to remain majority leader for more than just 2 years. And in his head, this is probably the way to do it. He's recognized that, hey, maybe if we give something back, the public will vote for us. Yeah, I think that might work. I think that might work. He has this caucus, all of them to come together. They come up with say, yes, we think that may work. What can we do? Oh, let's appropriate the policy that Sanders had to eliminate student debt. But let's Democrat that shit down a bit and just say 50,000. That's what they're doing. And look, it's effective. I mean, for fuck's sake, it's effective. All right, I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. This should not be a difficult thing to do. For the life of me, I have no idea why it is. A flick of a pen. I don't know who you think you're going to offend, but you're not going to offend anybody if you do the same thing across the board. And yeah, community colleges should be free. State colleges should be free. And if you get to the point where you eliminate that 50K and you make that possible, yeah, that's a positive fucking thing. Look, I keep making the point. It seems that there is a lot of focus from the standpoint of the public on Democrats. And that focus is on them while they're trying to craft a bill to give a lot of fucking money back and to have a big stimulus. 1.9 trillion. And doing that stimulus, and with that focus that's on it, it's very possible that depending upon what comes out of that, especially if they're talking about additional stimulus along the way. I mean, the $15 minimum wage thing is huge. Even though they're taking forever to pass it, and you may get to the point where another Congress can basically eliminate it. I don't think that another Congress can eliminate it, though. I think once you have $15 minimum wage, if you try to take it down, you're going to lose your seat trying to make that vote to give people less money. So there's that part. But they have a potential, a chance here to knock this shit out of the park. And it seems like they're fumbling in doing so. You should have given the people the $2,000. Why are you having a fight about whether it's going to be $1,400 or $2,000? Give the fucking $2,000. Why are you even having this argument? It makes you look utterly ridiculous that you don't want to give the extra $600 to the public. Meaning the moment that the argument is made, you should have did it. Dispense it. You kept saying 2,000, get 2,000. That's a fumble. The 50K. Give the 50K. Why are you having a fight about whether or not to give people 50,000 for their student loans? Give the 50K. You're basically bringing up arguments for the opposition. Well, what about private schools? Who gives a shit about private schools? Give the 50K. I'm making a point that some of this stuff should be straightforward and simple, especially from the standpoint of what can we give back to the public to show the public that we give a shit about the public. And the sense of Republicans are going to do anything that Democrats do gets a little bit more leeway, especially even the incremental stuff. It's sad. It's unfortunate the public has been so beaten down that little incremental stuff is great. But it is true. It's very possible that they're able to skate for the next 2 years and potentially the next 4 years off of small incremental policies that should have been passed years ago. But we'll see. Maybe they'll fuck it up. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. Thanks all.